First Five Lake is proud. We are so proud to host today's webinar. At First Five, our vision is that one day the success of Lake County and all of California is going to be measured by the well-being of our youngest children. And our mission is to build up the early childhood systems and supports that are needed to ensure that our youngest children are safe and healthy and ready to succeed in school and life. And our webinar today is a step in that direction. We are grateful for our partnership with Lake County Child Welfare Services and Chabot Las Positas Community College District to provide the funding that makes this available and possible. And today we are joined by each of you, foster and adoptive parents, social workers, and service providers from all around Lake County, colleagues from Shasta, Butte, Del Norte, Fresno, Humboldt, Riverside, Alameda, Modoc, and Stanislaus. Maybe some others I missed. If anyone is not present live today, we are excited that you'll be able to join us on YouTube to watch the replay and catch up later. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the First Five Lake YouTube channel later today. Go ahead and keep yourself on mute unless you have a question or you want to interact, just so that there's no distracting background noises. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker to you, Melissa Roshan Potter, better known as MelRo, and she is an advocate and mentor for children, a professional model and inspirational speaker, and director of diversity inclusion services for CASA of Ohio. And I will not spend much time talking to you about her background because the main focus of today's webinar is for her to tell her own story in her own words and in her own way. But I will tell you that as MelRo and I work together to prepare for this session, the highest praise I can give her as I reflect back on our conversations leading up to today is that she kept me waiting. Maybe that doesn't sound like an asset, but the first time that we met, we had to delay our meeting because she had been called into a multidisciplinary team meeting to advocate for a young person. And I know that many, if not all of you on our call today and who are listening, you are also people who don't own your own schedules, who respond when the need arises and who prioritize children and their needs above all else. And so you are among a friend today in our speaker, and she is among friends as well. So I encourage you all of us to take a deep breath, to settle in, to know we are among friends. And MelRo, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Carla. I was sweating when you said I kept you waiting. I was like, oh, I'm sorry. But no, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. I have to say that, well, one, I'm honored to be here because anytime that I am allowed to share my journey with others, that is a complete blessing. But the other piece is, and I'm sure you all can understand this, when you have gone through so much adversity, right, to be able to be on the other side of that in your right mind, mostly, and amongst the land of the living, it's truly an honor. So thank you very, very much, Carla, and your team for having me here. So since we have a smaller group, I want to make this very interactive. So what we can do is utilize the chat in a couple of ways. Number one, if you feel like what I'm saying is like, yes, you were spitting those bars, queen, that kind of thing, put a number one in the chat. Okay. Number one is just like, yes, I'm feeling it. I love it. If you also have a question, put it in the chat. And if I don't happen to see it, Carla will definitely be able to see those questions. I am going to break in time for questions and comments. The final thing is that I will say that some of the things that I talk about today can be triggering, okay? Because I will be talking about some child abuse and, pieces of my past that have been a bit more traumatic. So if you feel like, this is a bit too much for me right now, take care of yourself, put yourself first, exit the meeting, come back to it later when you feel ready, and able. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it. As Carla said, my name is Melissa Rochon. That's my entire first name, but I go by MelRo. My last name is Potter. I do live in Columbus, Ohio. And as she also mentioned, I am the Diversity Inclusion Services Director for Ohio CASA. And I'm super, super honored to serve in that role. I also am a professional mentor to children here in the United States, as well as the UK, and also some parts of Africa, as well as Jamaica. So we're going to go ahead and jump into my story. I've created a PowerPoint for you. I promise it's not going to be boring. And I also promise I won't be before you too long. You know how in church, if some of you guys go to church, they say, we're not going to be here too long. And then you're there 5 hours. Not going to happen today. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get into the presentation. Let's see. Do you all see First Five Lake? Fantastic. All right, so today our meeting agenda is I've titled this presentation From Trauma to Triumph and From Pain to Power. And then we are going to be opening the floor for questions and answers. Now I know that I have a diverse group of amazing people today. So at the end, I also would love to know what agency you're representing as well, so we can shout you out. So to tell my story, I think it's important to go back to the beginning of like how I came to be here, right? And what that is going to require is for you to use a little bit of your imagination, all right? So what I would like you to do at this time is just close your eyes. If you don't feel comfortable closing your eyes, perhaps you can just look in your lap. But what I need you to do is be able to envision this person that I'm going to tell you about. It's not me. I need you to envision this person, envision the time period it was in so that you could really connect with this person. She's very, very important to the story. All right. So the time period is in the 80s. The setting is the city of Chicago, Illinois. I'd like you to imagine a young African-American girl, 13 years old, a bit heavier set. She had lived in foster care since she was 8 years old due to physical trauma in her family, and food became her best friend. She was one of those youth who were very problematic, had a lot of behavioral problems, didn't have a lot of family support. She had experienced sexual trauma while in foster care, as well as physical and certainly emotional abuse. And she was constantly bullied at school because she was part of the LGBTQIA community. And so because she identified as being lesbian, she was constantly teased, 13 and a half years old. Now, this little girl, one day she's walking through her neighborhood, and I want you to imagine her eating her bag of chips. Okay, so she's walking and she's eating her snack. Now I'd like you to imagine the feeling that she might have had, just the feeling of just, I don't have anyone, I don't have any support. I make food my best friend. I'm constantly, depressed. Why doesn't anyone want me? I'm tired of being bullied. I want you to feel that. Now I want you to imagine that there is a man in the neighborhood who is kind of creepy looking, right? He's just doesn't have good vibes around him. And this girl, she always had a bad feeling when she saw this man in the neighborhood. But because she didn't have a lot of support, because she had been bullied, and she was always constantly experiencing that loneliness, even though her gut said not to go toward this man when he called her name, against her better judgment, she did. Imagine her walking toward him. Imagine her walking into a house. You can open your eyes now. When she walked into that house, Sarah, this young woman, was brutally raped, and that day she became pregnant. I am the baby from that rape. So at 13 and a half years old, my mother was brutally raped, and that is how I came to be, right? Number one, I was born into foster care. Number two, what we know, and I know a lot of us know this already, with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, when a person has a high ACE score and they then carry a baby, their womb is actually preparing the baby for fight or flight. So when I was born, I had an overactive adrenal gland already because of the trauma that my mother had passed on to me. And as you can see here, I was a very sickly looking child. You know, I was very pale because I was malnourished. I had a lot of stomach issues. And we know that children that have, experienced a lot of trauma or were born into trauma, they often have a lot of stomach issues. Okay. I was a very sad baby. And I also had experienced some trauma while I was with my mother. Now, my right hand, which you might be able to see it, but if you look closely, you should see some dark discoloration compared to this hand. This is going to be important in my story in just a few moments. But this dark discoloration was because my hand was burned by my mother. So I have a 3rd-degree burn mark there. And it's interesting because I am in my 40s now. And for many, many years, I was very ashamed of my hands, and every time I would look at my hands, it would cause me a lot of anger. I now can look at my hands and not experience that anger or that trigger anymore, but we'll get into that. But my mother, she got tired of hearing me scream. She got tired of hearing me cry. She got just tired of me being this baby, right? And I was this constant reminder of the trauma that she had really gone through. And so the only thing she knew how to do was really relate to me in the way that adults had related to her, and that was physical abuse. So my mother burned my hand. I was 9 months old. And from that point, I had to be removed from my mother's care. So I was placed into what we know as kinship care when a child lives with a family member. But here's the thing. I was placed back with my mother's mother, my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, the same woman who had physically abused my mother. So I was placed back into the home where my mother was sick, where she was mistreated, you know? And I often like to say that we repeat what is not repaired. So because my grandmother hadn't done that work to heal herself, everything that my mother had gone through, I went through the vicious physical abuse, psychological abuse, witnessing drug usage, and so on and so forth. By the time I was 10 years old, I had gone through so much, so much, to the point where I one day told my grandmother that I hated her, and I meant it. Like I just lost my temper and I said, I hate you. And from that point, my grandmother took some barbecue tongs and actually beat me with those. Okay. And they had come off the grill. So I was burned again. And I had to be immediately removed from my grandmother's care. Very, very traumatic experience. Number one, being beaten again. But number two, being beaten in front of other people. Just it was humiliating even at 10 years old. And then number three, when I was transported out of my grandmother's care, I was transported by a police officer. And we know that a lot of our children have that experience, right? When they have to leave their homes, they have to leave with a police officer. And the message that can often convey to a child is that they have committed a crime. And what's the crime? It's the crime of them being alive, is how they feel. And I know how they feel because that was my life. So I moved into my first foster home. It was an amazing foster family. I am African American. They were Caucasian. I loved them. But my grandmother, back then the laws were a lot different, right? And so my grandmother was able to have say so over what types of homes I was in, even though she was the abuser. Okay, so we're talking about the 90s. So my grandmother demanded that I move with a Black family because she felt like her Black granddaughter needed to be with a Black family. It turns out it's not about color, but it turns out that that would be a very fateful decision that would, I mean, yeah, because the next home that I moved into, I experienced trauma. All right. The third home I went, into, I experienced neglect, which is also a form of trauma. And so as I continued to move into these different homes, my attitude started to change as well, right? So I was starting to become a very angry child. I was constantly saying, I don't care. I hate everybody. I was just very angry. And I was carrying my things in these Black trash bags, right? And we are very familiar with this, aren't we? A lot of our kids are having to carry their things in these Black trash bags. And it makes you feel like you are not worth more than you were. It made me feel like I wasn't worth anything more than the trash bags that I was carrying. And children will always rise to who you make them feel that they are, make them believe that they are, right? So if y'all are saying that I'm bad, I'm not saying you guys, but if my foster family are saying, oh, she's bad, and I'm hearing that, not a problem. I will rise to that occasion. If you're saying, oh, she's problematic, I will rise to that occasion. And when I'm carrying my things in these Black trash bags and I'm feeling like I'm not worth more than those trash bags, I will also rise to the occasion. So by the time I was 15 years old, so we went from one foster home to three, then 3 to 5, and then 5 to 15, right? And then by the time I was 15 years old, I lived in 20 foster homes. Now, some of you might be saying, why? Were all your foster parents abusive? No. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Some of them would do, it was like little micro aggression and micro abuse, like all the foster youth can sit at this table, but the normal family, they sit at their own table, things like that. All the foster youth, they live in the basement away from the family, and the basement's got flies and stuff everywhere, but we're just providing you shelter, things like that. That's also a form of abuse. So by the time I was 15, I lived in these 20 foster homes, and I was a very angry 15-year-old. And we've worked with them, haven't we? That child who is constantly truant in school, that child who is failing all their classes, that child who wants to smoke weed and do things that they have no business doing, that child who is having sex too early, right? And we know that children that decide to have sex early, when they have been exposed to sexual abuse, that's how they know how to relate. And that's number one. Number two, when a child is experienced that sexual abuse, their boundaries have been disrespected. So they don't know boundaries. So they don't know how to set them. They don't know how to respect them. They don't know how to set them for their body. So they also willingly give themselves away. Okay. So I'm having sex too early. I am doing drugs. I am constantly truant. I am disrespectful to my teachers. I'm stealing. I was a mess, but I was hurting. And this is the only way that I knew how to get that hurt out. There's a lot of times what we do is we see a child and we see the behavior, right? And we know it's like an iceberg, isn't it? We see the iceberg, which is the actual behavior. But what's underneath the iceberg? Underneath the iceberg is the sexual trauma, is the neglect, is the abandonment, is the unresolved pain. And so I was surrounded by case workers and teachers that were not like you all. They just wrote me off as she's disruptive, she has no hope. let's just push her to the side, not advocate for her. Whereas you all are very much committed to these youth, and you're willing to stay in there, and you're willing to go in deep with them and go and look underneath that iceberg and heal them at that root. I didn't have that. So what ended up happening is the day that I decided to go to school, right? I actually met a boy, and you guys know the rest of the story. Met a boy. He was able to tell me how beautiful I was. And I just immediately believed that him and I were going to be together forever. And I mean, one, that's a teenager thing. But if you are also a teenager who has never really been loved by someone, then anybody is going to be able to come along and come in your ear and just tell you anything, and you will give yourself away because you just want to experience that love. Let me ask you a question. Does it surprise you that this boy also lived in foster care and had gone through the same type of traumas that I went through? Does that surprise you? Miss Patty says, no, absolutely not. Because we know that, number one, healed people tend to hang out with healed people, right? Sick people tend to hang out with sick people, number one. Number two, there is something called a trauma bond. Somebody put that in the chat, trauma bond. All right. So we know that there are people that believe that they are so much in love and they are soulmates and twin flames. No, babe, you have a trauma bond with someone, and you are literally bonding because of that trauma. And so we're two kids that are bonded with this trauma. I eventually end up becoming pregnant. And, it's very interesting how those hugs that he was giving me turned to hits, and how calling me beautiful one moment, turned into calling me B words the next. Before long, I was in a full-blown teen domestic violence relationship. Let me tell you, this picture that I am showing you is not easy, because if you really look at my lips, you will notice that my bottom lip is busted. When I was at my baby shower, I had a busted lip. I used to cry when I would look at this picture. My eyes are a little bit sweaty now. They're a little bit sweaty now because when I say sweaty, I mean they're teary-eyed. They're a little bit sweaty now because it hurts for me that baby, that young woman there didn't love herself enough, right? To protect herself. She didn't have the tools. She didn't have the tribe around her of amazing folks like yourself to be able to say, no, we're going to advocate for you and make sure that you're safe. And that's all I knew I only knew how to relate in trauma, because we repeat what is not repaired. So that is all that I saw. So I equated love with domestic violence. So now I'm in this full-blown teen domestic violence relationship, and I'm only 16 and a half. By the time I had my son, I was 17. Did you know that 1 in 3 adolescents in the United States is a victim of physical, sexual, emotional, and verbal abuse from a dating partner? And that's why, we'll get into on our next session together, I'm going to talk to you about how to talk to you and teach you how to connect to youth that are underserved and are marginalized and have gone through trauma. But I will tell you, a lot of them, they're in these unhealthy circumstances because that is how they knew how to relate. So I eventually have this baby. Oh, I'm sorry. And 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men in the United States have been victims of physical violence by an intimate partner. So I think it's very important to share that. All right. So I eventually had my baby. I named him Trey. Here he is. He is precious, right? Absolutely beautiful. When I held my son, I looked at him and I never forgot the feeling that I had. And that was, I do not know how to be a mom, but I'm definitely going to figure it out. And I am going to make certain, sir, little man, that you never experience any type of trauma. And I failed. And I failed because one day, my son's father and I, we got into an argument. Now, at this time, because there was domestic violence that was occurring between these two teenagers, and I was also on welfare, it meant that caseworkers were aware of our case. All right. And the caseworkers knew that there was this fighting. And I had a case manager. She was very much one of those, you're not going to make it. You're a mess. I don't believe in you. And if I had my choice, I would take my son or your son away from you. Why is that important for you to know? Because sometimes, not any of you, but sometimes child welfare workers, they judge primary parents so easily, and they're not willing to work with them because of their own personal judgments. And they don't want to reunify the child to the primary parent, or they just, oh, well, I wouldn't do that, so I'm just going to write that parent off. We must never do that, because we don't know what a person has gone through. And with just a little bit of support or a lot of bit of support, that parent can turn it around. But, and let me just jump ahead and say that my son is alive and he's well. So you could take a sigh of relief, but I do need to tell you about this. So I failed in that the case managers had said, the next time you fight your son's father, we're actually going to take your son away. We're going to put him in a foster care. And I was absolutely terrified at this possibility, because I knew what it was like to live in foster care. I was born into it. I lived in it all my life. I didn't want that to happen to my son, and I made him a promise that I wouldn't allow that to happen. So the next time my son's father and I got into a fight, family, I left. And I went to the library, thinking that, if I remove myself from the home, everything will be okay. I left my son with his father. And when I came back, my son had these broken capillaries all over his eyes from screaming so hard. He had been shaken by his father. So I failed to protect him. That night, went to the emergency room. The doctors, did assessments on my son, let me know what happened. And there was an immediate plan of action to remove Trey from my care. The very next day, this is really cool. The very next day, I show up in court with my baby. And I know I packed all his clothes in his little diaper bag, because I knew I wasn't going to see him anymore. And I was assigned a CASA advocate. And it was just myself, my baby, the CASA advocate, the state of Washington versus me, my son's father versus me, his mother versus me, because she was trying to get the baby. And I felt like everyone was versus me, right? And I looked the judge in the eye and I said, Your Honor, I am not a perfect mother, but I am a loving mother. And all I need is just a bit of support. And I just need one chance to keep my son. And if you would allow me this chance, I promise you I will not fail. And my CASA advocate, she also advocated for me. The judge, he went on break, came back after a few hours, and delivered this message. And that was, we're going to allow you to keep your son, even though you failed to protect him. But here's the stipulation. You have 24 hours to find a place to live. 24 hours to find a place to live, family. Remember, I didn't have a mother in my life, a father in my life. I didn't have cousins, uncles, none of that. I was absolutely terrified. Again, where is I going to find this tribe of support, right? And that's why I'm saying that when we think about primary families, a lot of them are faced with the very same things that we are, or that I was, excuse me. And I think it's sometimes from the outside looking in, easy to judge them like, well, why don't you get it together? Some of them just don't have the tools and they just don't know how. But luckily, my CASA advocate was able to find me a place to live with my son. And it was called, or it is called, the Ardell Mitchell home in Seattle, Washington. Okay. So before I went to the Ardell Mitchell home, I had to fill out an application. I had to interview before a board of old Black women. And if y'all know anything about older Black women, they don't play. I'm talking like those old Southern grandmothers, they don't play. All right. And I had to convince them that they should allow me to have the opportunity to live in their program. It took a little bit of time, and I had to ask for an extension from the court to be able to keep my son, because remember, they said you only have 24 hours to find a place to live. So I had to live in 2 other foster homes. Now it's 22 foster homes at this time. So I had to live in a couple foster homes, respite care, while I was waiting on finding out if I could live in the Ardell Mitchell home. And luckily, they allowed me that opportunity. So that was my 23rd placement. Okay. So Trey and I were allowed to live in the Ardell Mitchell home. We stayed here for 2 years, and it changed my life. I now sit on their board of directors to this day, and we're still serving youth. But here is Trey and I, right in the middle there. And we're, pictured here with the other youth, the other moms. And it was difficult, but it was also amazing at the same time. Difficult because I was finally living in structured housing, and I didn't know a lot of structure. And the other piece is that I was a mom and had to do this on my own. So we all had our own apartments. We had a curfew where we had to be home every night at 9 p.m. On the weekends, it was 11 p.m. And if you were late, a huge alarm would sound when you opened the main door. And if you were late 3 times, you would lose your housing. There were women who would come in and inspect the apartments for cleanliness. If you didn't meet those requirements after 3 times, you would lose your housing. And they also taught us life skills, parenting skills, how to balance a checkbook. Remember when people used to use checks? All those things. And it really set me up for greatness and leadership. Trey and I, we lived there for 2 years, and I worked. I dropped out of high school, got my GED, got a job working at a bank, and just pushed myself because I knew that there were caseworkers that were coming around constantly asking all the girls if they wanted to get on these, waiting lists for Section 8. And I knew that I didn't want to go down that path. There's nothing wrong with Section 8. I just knew that I wanted to break that cycle of poverty in my family. Wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but I knew that I had to. At this time, my son's father, all his parental rights were completely severed. So he never saw him again, never got any child support, none of that. So we lived in that program for 2 years, and things were great. Now, toward the end of the 2-year mark, I was shopping for diapers with my son one day, and I was approached by a woman who I thought was absolutely bonkers, because she said this to me and I didn't believe her. She said, "Miss, do you mind if I talk to you for a moment?" And I'm like, "Sure." And she said, "Have you ever considered modeling?" Okay. And I thought she was bonkers because remember, I had gone through so much trauma, right? And though you couldn't necessarily see those scars existed within me. You could see one scar here, but they existed within my soul and my heart and in my mind. And so the way in which I viewed myself was not the way in which she was viewing me. She was like, how you are with those youth that you work with, how you are with those families that you work with, how you're able to see past the poverty, past the trauma, past the mental health issues, and you're able to actually see that person. That's what she represented for me. So even though we're talking about modeling here, it's very symbolic for the work that you're doing. But she asked me if I ever had considered modeling. I told her no. She said I had a great look, and she asked me to give her a call. And I was absolutely terrified, afraid. I keep saying terrified. I'm going to change that word. I was afraid to take her card, but I was even more afraid of not knowing what would happen if I didn't. Like, what would happen if I didn't call her? Or what would happen if I did call her? I want to find out. So I made that phone call, and I eventually got signed with one of the top modeling agencies in Seattle, Washington, called TCM Models, which I'm still with to this day. They helped me to work out, cleaned up my image, cut my hair. And the next thing you know, I'm working. And this interesting thing happened. I began to realize, I can make things look very beautiful, but I don't necessarily have to do the work within, because as long as I look good, then I'll be all right. And how many teenage girls and boys do you know right now that are on social media posting these selfies, posting these pictures, these TikTok videos, and they are making everything seem amazing? They've got these filters on, but they're not doing the work within. The reason why is it's easy to do the work on the outside. It's not so easy to do the work on the inside. And that's what modeling represented for me. Eventually, I would end up moving to New York City with my son. Everyone around me was like, oh my gosh, you're moving to New York. You've got a little baby. You don't have any money. How are you going to make it out there? And I'm like, that's the exact reason why I'm going to move, is because you guys are saying that I can't. So I ended up moving to New York, July 31st, 2001. All right. So a few months before September 11th. And I was about 30 something blocks away from the, World Trade Center. And though I did not see the planes actually hit the towers, when I looked back on the city as I had to walk home because all transportation was shut down, I saw the mushroom cloud over the city. And I realized in that moment how lucky I was to be alive. But it made me think about wanting to find my biological parents, because sometimes it's in the moments of trauma and the moment of great adversity when you start to take inventory of what you have to be grateful for. And it really makes you think about family. And that night, I tried to find my biological parents. I tried to, Google and use 411. You guys remember 411? So I was trying to use 411 to find my mother, and I could not find her. And I wasn't able to find her because it wasn't time for me yet. So remember in the beginning of the presentation, I had spoken about how my hand was actually burned and how I have that 3rd-degree burn scar, right? What is interesting is my very first modeling job. I showed up, my hair was done, my makeup was done, I was ready to go. And the client looks at me and says, well, you look amazing, but we're actually not going to be using your face today, right? We're going to be using your hands. Now, instantly, I'm like, oh my gosh, if the client sees my hands, they are absolutely going to send me home because I have these scars on my hands. And what ended up happening is the client didn't even see the scars. And I also think about our youth who have these physical scars, or they have these emotional scars. And they think it's so ugly. They think that this is just like the most terrible thing. And you all are working with them. And you're like, no, you're amazing. But it's hard for them to believe it because the scar is connected to trauma. So really what the goal is and should be is to let these students know, these kids know that your scars actually make you beautiful. So instead of you having flaws, you actually are flawsome. Somebody put flawsome in the chat. Flawsome. So instead of awesome, flawsome, right? It's helping them to change the narrative about the scars that bother them, whether they are physical or they're mental. So think about that child who has anxiety issues. How can you help them flip that narrative into something that empowers them? right? How is it that you can help that child who might have burn marks like I have, or who might be a bit overweight, or whatever that scar is? How can you help them flip that narrative? We will talk about that in that next session, but I also want you to think about that. And if you have some ideas, put them in the chat and we'll share them at the end. The client never saw my scars. And if they saw them, they didn't comment on them and they didn't take them out. And as you can see, the little gray arrow there, excuse me, there's a mark on my finger that I got from child abuse as well. They didn't actually remove that mark. And that is proof right there that our scars give us character and actually make us beautiful, period. Somebody put period with a T at the end in the chat. All right. So whenever I talk about I model, some people like to see the receipts. So I'll take you through a couple of the pictures. Okay. You guys might see, oh, she's pretty. Oh, that's her CSI look. What I see is a woman who had at this point been married again, or married, who had gone through domestic violence in that marriage. I see a woman who had an unhealthy relationship with food and who was struggling with bulimia and anorexia. All right. See how I can talk about that and I don't have shame? That's because I know that shame is not my name. Somebody put shame is not my name in the chat, because that's something you can also share with your youth. Shame is not your name and it is not your portion. And sometimes the things that you're embarrassed about are the very things that you need to embrace, because that is how you actually transform that pain into personal power. But I see a woman who was struggling with bulimia. I see a woman who was constantly covering up with makeup and fashion and clothes to really disguise what was underneath her iceberg. I see a beautiful iceberg with a whole bunch of unresolved trauma underneath. I always say it is better to deal with your issues before they deal with you, because they will. This picture, if you look at my eyes, remember that baby picture I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, how sad those eyes were? Not a lot of difference between then and now. The eyes are the windows to the soul. You can see a lot of pain and a lot of sadness in my eyes. They looked lifeless. In full transparency, I usually don't share this part of my story, but I have gotten to a place now where I do. And I will tell you that at this time I was married, and my ex-husband actually had flipped me and broke my left ankle. And that was a triggering moment for me, to the point where I just checked out. Put a number 1 in the chat if you know of someone who has ever checked out and has ever been very, very tired, just tired of life. I can't do this anymore. It might be you, or it might be someone that you know. I'm talking about that tired that a nap or sleep cannot cure. You are tired in your soul. You are done. I can't take it anymore. I'm tired of losing. I'm tired of adversity. I can't take this anymore. The pain is too great. That is the moment that I got to in my life. And so I went to the Hoover Reservoir here in Columbus, Ohio, in Westerville, Ohio, and I made the decision that I was going to take my life. I was going to make a permanent decision over problems and adversity that I really at the time didn't realize was actually temporary. Because when you are in the thick of pain, you don't know that that pain is temporary. You just know that it hurts right now and I can't take anymore. I'm tired of struggling. I'm tired of losing out. I'm tired of adversity. This world is crazy. I'm tired of COVID, right? I'm tired of seeing people slaughtered on the news. I'm tired of racial tension. I'm tired of seeing our families struggle. I'm tired of having to carry the weight of the world from our families and our children on my back. I need to take care of myself, and there is no time to take care of myself. I'm tired of being re-triggered by the work that I'm doing. Whatever it is, you get to the point where you're so tired and you are just like in the thick of it and you can't see past it. And in those moments, I've learned now to take a break, but not give up. Somebody put in the chat, you take a break, but you do not give up. And you also have to realize that what breaks you actually leads to your breakthrough for others. Had I ended my life today, this presentation with you and I would not have existed. And so many of the other amazing things that are happening in my life that I'm witnessing. Problems are always temporary. Pain is always temporary. And the only way out of it is actually through it, not to give up. Luckily, someone saw me getting ready to jump and took her time to actually lend an ear and call the police. And they got me off the edge of that reservoir that day. And I ended up in a psych ward. Oh, just a moment. Here's a picture of my children, and here's the psych ward. But let me go back to my kids. When I tell this story, sometimes people are like, well, you weren't thinking about your children? When you are mentally ill, to you and I, you might think, well, yeah, I mean, I would be thinking about my children because we're in our right minds, right? But when you are mentally ill and you are hurting, it's hard to it's hard to just be rational. It's hard to think clearly, right? So I want to encourage us all to make sure that we're not judging and that we are utilizing more empathy and understanding and taking our time to really understand what's underneath that iceberg of people. See, a lot of people have judged me, right? Oh, she's so beautiful. She must have had two parents and have had a perfect life and da 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 da, and not really taking the time to understand what's underneath. The reason why is everybody is so busy, aren't they? Everyone's so busy nowadays. And it's quicker to make a judgment rather than it is to actually sit and consider what can be underneath someone's iceberg. No, I wasn't thinking about my children. I was thinking about just stopping the pain because I was tired. That is why I made that decision. And as I laid in the middle of this psych ward, I was shackled down by my hands, shackled down by my feet, and most importantly, I was shackled in my mind. I was imprisoned in my mind. Lonely, hurting, tired. And I knew that the only thing that I could do was either A, go down the path of constant psych wards, antipsychotic medication, mental institutions, definitely considered that a few times in my life. Or I could rise up out of that bed and make the choice to be committed to wellness. Left or right. And I had a nurse come in that hospital room. All right. And she started to talk to me and was asking me questions and was trying to encourage me. Put a number 1 in the chat if you've ever tried to talk to a child or a parent or a person who is hurting and all you're trying to do is comfort them and all they're trying to do is just push you away. Put a number 1 in the chat. Here, let me put that 1 in the chat too. They want to push you away and you're like, but I'm just trying to help. It's because they're hurting. And I'll be honest, as I'm laying in this hospital bed and this nurse who's Caucasian is talking to me, I'm thinking this white woman can't relate to me, which is absolutely BS because there is no color when it comes to love. There is no color when it comes to humanity. But I'm just sharing that with you because sometimes people who look different than us, that maybe they're part of the LGBTQIA community, maybe they are of a different ethnicity than we are. Maybe they're from a different socioeconomic status than we are. All right. Is that distracting, the grass cutting? Okay. They're different and you are sitting here trying to relate to them and you're just not able to connect. That person, they're not able to connect to you because you need to disarm them. You need to let them know, get down on their level, that I hear you, I'm not judging you, and I understand you, and I just want to listen. So when the nurse said to me that she just wanted to listen, that is when I broke and began to share my heart. She left and came back with a coin, a penny. And she asked me this question. She said, what do you think the distance is between where you are right now in this hospital bed and where you could be? And I was just like, girl, a million years, because I you know, I'm probably going to lose my kids. I'm in a domestic violence marriage right now. I don't know who I am. I want to meet my mother and father. I'm hurting. And she said, the distance between where you are right now and where you could be is simply the flip of this coin. She flips the coin. She can't give me the coin because I was in a psych ward. She said, it's the flip of a coin. That is how fast it takes for you to make a different decision. Now, that nurse was not supposed to do that. She was not supposed to come in and talk to me. She wasn't a licensed counselor. Put a number 1 in the chat if you know of someone who goes above and beyond in their job. If you know of someone who goes above and beyond and does things that are not by the book, because you want to reach those youth and those families. And thank God that you know that person. Thank God that that person is you, because that can change someone's life, change their trajectory completely, heal them and help them. When I left that hospital bed and I checked out of the hospital, right? I still have the penny she gave me. She put it in a little manila envelope. I made it into a necklace. Can't find it. Don't judge me. But it's still in my heart. I also made the choice to get a divorce because I refused to allow my children to witness domestic violence. And I refused to be anyone's doormat. I realized that trauma ran in my family, but I made the choice and said, it's going to run out with me. And I'm going to make the commitment to do everything that I can to get to the other side of this. I got myself into therapy, cognitive behavioral health therapy, and EMDR therapy. Still am in EMDR therapy, and it is not easy, but I am worth the work. And I was tired of living my life broken. I was tired of being beautifully broken. I was tired of seeing value in my pictures, but not value in my life. So I went to therapy, and I'm still in therapy because healing is a never-ending process, right? Your finish line is always moving. I stopped modeling for a while because I needed to understand, not understand. I needed to understand what beauty really meant. And I was also tired of covering up and making things look like they were okay and not being okay. My life depended on this. And when I was in therapy at the start, I, realized that I had anxiety issues, right? Had some PTSD. I still live with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It's not who I am. It's just part of my narrative. And I also practice radical grace, and it's okay. It's all right that sometimes certain smells bring me back to certain events. It is okay that I can't watch certain movies because they cause me to be triggered. That's okay. And it's okay that I'm not all the way where I want to be. That means that I still have purpose. And put your hand on your heart real quick for me. Everyone's heart still beating. Miss Patty, is your heart still beating? All right. She gave me a thumbs up. We were going to send the ambulance to you. Okay. No one's turning blue. As long as that heart still is still beating, babe, that still means you have purpose. And I still have purpose. And so while I was in therapy, I realized that, I had these disorders and this and that. And I just told my therapist, his name is Mark. I said, Mark, let's just quit then. If I'm this crazy, then why don't I just quit? And he corrected me. He said, you are not crazy because you're in therapy. Everyone needs therapy. You don't just go to the doctor you don't just go to the dentist. When you're sick or when you have a cavity, don't you go for checkups? Everyone should go to therapy to check up, especially in the world that we live in now. Shoot, being on Instagram should cause anyone to have to go to therapy. Let's just be honest. Shoot. He said, you are not crazy. You need to change your language. You are a woman who has been through her stuff, and you have these residual effects because of it, and it's okay. He said, now you can use the mental health problems, PTSD, hypervigilance, avoidance, anxiety, flashbacks. You can use all of this as stones to either help you dig yourself out of this ditch to get to a place of greatness, or you can use those stones, just make your mics for me, or you can
Maybe be a sign.
pardon me, you can use those stones to bury you. The choice is yours. So use them like the problems you can create. You can imagine that each problem is a stone and it's going to bury you, or you can imagine those problems are stones that you will stand on to dig yourself out. The choice is yours. And I decided to do the work and get myself out of it. And my healing process wasn't easy, as you can imagine, because I had to really go within and stop sweeping stuff under the rug and deal. You can't heal what you won't face. So I had to face it. Eventually, when I was ready, an opportunity opened up for me to meet Sarah. Remember I told you about Sarah at the beginning of the story, my biological mother. When I met my biological mother, I did not ask her why she had done this or that to my hand. All I said to her was, I love you and I honor you and thank you for having me. My children were able to meet her. It was a beautiful experience. Now, my mother eventually passed away from an overdose. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to meet her and reconcile rather than live with regret that I didn't. And not everyone is going to have the opportunity to reconcile in the way that I did. Sometimes the reconciliation just comes from doing that inner work. But I was given the gift to hug her and meet her and honor her. And then I eventually met the man who raped her, my father. And I had questions for him. And I asked those questions. How is it that you were able to be with someone that was young? And his answer was, she had a mind of a woman. And he began to cry. He was absolutely embarrassed, but you darn right, I held him accountable. I'm a mother of a 13-year-old daughter now. Absolutely, I'm holding you accountable, but held him accountable without judging. Does that make sense? So I'm not judging you, but these are the facts. And I need you to own that for yourself. And he apologized, told me how proud of me he was. And I'm really grateful that I made that choice to forgive him. Because you see, unforgiveness is like drinking poison, but you're expecting the person who has harmed you to die. Only you're the one that's drinking the poison. And we know I was drinking poison because I was in a psych ward. I couldn't live that way anymore. So I made the choice to forgive him and I felt freedom. Here's him holding hands. And as you can see, our nail beds are kind of shaped the same. I eventually met my siblings. This is not all of them, but I have 11 siblings. I have about 19 or 20 nieces and nephews, and they are an amazing, amazing family. This picture is the last time I saw my father alive, because not long after I met him, he was drunk and picked up a bottle of Crown Royal, got himself drunk, and drove into the opposite end of traffic. And he is under that blue tarp that you see there. And I'm so, so very thankful that I was able to, like I said, grieve him from a place of regret and not reconciliation. Okay. I'm sorry, and I said that wrong. I was so, thank you, Carla, I saw you. I'm so grateful I was able to grieve him from a place of reconciliation and not regret. All right. The next piece that I did for my healing is I went back to one of the hardest foster homes that I had ever lived in. Now, I realized that my foster parents, they didn't live there anymore. The foster parents that I experienced sexual trauma with, I realized they didn't live there anymore and that it would be safe for me to go back to. And I also went with one of my tallest, biggest friends because I told her that this is something that I wanted to do. Now, listen, I only wanted to stand on that gravel. I told her, I said, Makila, I just want to go to the house and stand on the gravel and then I'll get back in the car. She said, okay. So she's sitting in the car, I stand on the gravel. So I was like, I'm just going to walk a little bit further because I just want to see the property. And Makila is like, okay. Then I was like, Makila, I'm going to go and actually knock on the door and tell these people I'm on their property so they don't think I'm a weirdo. So then Makila, who's 6'2", gets out of the car and she's like, okay, girl, I got you. She's taking her earrings off, getting ready, right? So I go and knock on the door and this amazing owner, very, very kind man, answers the door. And I explained to him who I am, that I was one of the 13 foster youth that lived in this home. We had experienced a lot of trauma, and I was here for the first time visiting it. And the guy, he was just like, I heard about you guys. Like the neighbors told me how hard it was for you all. And it's such an honor to meet you. Listen, I'm not making this up. This guy is from Thailand. This entire house is dedicated to Buddhist monks. So a place that brought me so much trauma and pain is now a place that Buddhist monks live in. The flowers that you see there used to be weeds. That the housing color, it never looked like that. It was very run down and it represented trauma. But how symbolic was it that when I was ready and when I was doing that emotional healing work, that I would go back to a place and it'd be beautiful because of that healing work. Now, I don't recommend that everyone goes back to a place where they experience trauma. That was something that my therapist and I worked out for me, okay? When I got back to Ohio, because I was in Seattle, I decided that I was going to roll up my sleeves and get to work because I didn't want to just live a life where I was just modeling or took a break from modeling and then get back to it. No, I wanted to do something and I just didn't know what it was. But I came across these statistics that exist for foster youth, and that is children in foster care are 2 times more likely to experience pregnancy. They're 30% more likely by the age, I can't see it. I think it's 19. Is it 19, Carla? By the age of 19 to be incarcerated. PTSD is 2 times more likely than war vets, and 30% of the homeless population is in foster care. All right. And let me also add on that only 3% of our youth will graduate college nationally. Why is this data important? This data is important because 1, it lets us know the work that needs to continue to happen, but 2, I hit all of those. I was in juvenile detention. I was a teen mom. I live with PTSD, and I also experienced homelessness. And instead of me saying, oh my gosh, someone needs to change that, I decided that I was going to change that. I also learned about adverse childhood experiences. We know that there are various forms of childhood trauma that exist, and that for each type of childhood trauma, we give that person a number 1 on the scorecard. The higher their score, the more likely they are to experience heart disease and physical ailments and all of those things. Out of 10, I have an ACE score of 9. And rather than using that as like an emotional security blanket to make people feel sorry for me, like, hey, sorry I'm being a B, but I have a high ACE score, or hey, sorry I'm abusive to my children, I have a high ACE score. No, I decided that I was going to heal continue to heal, but also empower myself with the information so that I could go out and educate the world. And I'm not saying that, some of our families use their trauma as emotional security blankets. But what I am saying is there was a point in my life where I would wear my trauma like a badge of honor just because I wanted attention, because I didn't love myself. All right. So I'm only talking about myself here. We know that a person with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences is 2.2 times as likely to have heart disease, 2.4 times as likely to experience a stroke, 1.9 times as likely to have cancer, and 1.6 times as likely to have diabetes. And let me tell you something, 9 out of 10, that's not going to be my fate. It is not, because I am committed to wellness. Oprah also has an ACE score of 8 out of 10. Nelson Mandela had an ACE score of 9 out of 10. Steve Jobs had an ACE score of 7 out of 10. So you see, those that are doing amazing, great works in this world, they also have experienced great trauma. The children that are most damaged, someone put this in the chat, the children that are most damaged by this world often end up being the ones to change it. And I began to share my story all over this country. And what I realized is that though a lot of youth and adults couldn't necessarily relate to being in foster care, everybody can relate to what it is like to live in trauma, or what it is like to live with adversity. Especially now, because we all have gone through COVID together. We all have experienced some type of loss together. Maybe it was a loss of a loved one. Maybe it was someone not directly connected to us. Maybe it was loss of our health, or loss of income, or loss of being able to go outside because you were quarantined, loss of stability. Just be honest, in your area, you all have experienced a lot, right? But you keep getting up again and again, yet you are still on this call today because you are committed to serving. You're putting your stuff aside to still show up mighty and powerfully, and that is amazing. And so I kept on sharing my story all over. And what I realized also at the same time was that I began to heal. Because the more that you are serving and you are living a life of commitment in service, you heal yourself, but you also heal your community. And I was written about in a few articles and ended up becoming a foster parent trainer and then a trainer for trainers. And it's interesting because after I left foster care, I was like, yo, F foster care, I'm never going back. I don't want anything to do with it. And now I couldn't imagine not having anything to do with, I couldn't imagine a life not serving foster care. And that's why I said the things that often have broken us can lead to our breakthrough if we do the work. I eventually reconnected with my foster siblings. And that was a very powerful experience. This was the first time that I saw them after 20, almost 30 years. And the one on the left, I won't tell you his name, but he has agreed to allow his photo to be used. The one on the left has gone through just a lot of legal woes, and so has the one on the right. And they just shared with me that experience that we lived in that one foster home I talked to you both about, you all about, they just shared with me that it really took a toll on them. And it just messed their lives up in such a way that they made these decisions that they shouldn't have made. And that is what I was saying, how we see certain people make these decisions. And sometimes it's easy for us to judge them, but we are not taking that time to look underneath the iceberg. So just remember, we don't judge, use empathy, and consider what can be underneath that iceberg. I also got a chance to be on the OWN network, sat with Bishop Jakes, and then eventually my message got to the TED Talk stage and saw my son graduate high school. with honors. Now, today is April something something. What's today's date? April 15th. He is set to graduate college. He's been on the dean's list all 4.5 years. He's set to graduate college April 29th. All right. So when we do the work, we heal our families, we heal ourselves, and we heal the community. And my daughter gets an opportunity to see her mom speak. Her name is Corinne, and I'm raising a little warrior. All right, so let me just minimize this for a moment. I'm gonna have to minimize this, you guys, because I can't see it. All right, so my path for healing has included the following: inner child healing work. So I have a baby picture of myself. It's by my bedside, and I frequently talk to my little self, my little MelRo, and do these inner child healing exercises where I'm talking to myself and where I'm also listening back to what that inner child is saying and journaling all the time. I engage in constant shadow work using cognitive behavioral health therapy and the EMDR therapy. And so when we say shadow work, I just mean the darker parts of us, okay? I also utilize sound therapy quite a bit. So here's one of my sound bowls, because studies have been shown that people that have gone through heavy loads of trauma, their brain becomes rewired when they're engaging in sound therapy. So I highly recommend using sound therapy. You can take a picture with your phone of this presentation, or when you look back at it, you can just remember what I said, okay? I also salt float. All right, so I float in salt because it helps my body. I burn and write fire lists. So what a fire list is you create a list of things that you are hurting about, people that have harmed you that you want to forgive, everything that's bothering you. So you write these lists and you meditate, or if you are a person of faith, you pray, or you say affirmations, whatever feels comfortable for you. You say them over your list, and then you burn them and you let it go. I also constantly engage, and I'm a huge advocate of taking accountability for what is mine, and I refuse to carry what isn't. So when we talk about having a past of childhood trauma and sexual abuse, that's not my fault. Those things weren't my fault, and I'm just not taking those on, but I am accountable for my actions. All right. I practice radical self-acceptance, love, and grace. I am a journal junkie. I journal all the time. Put a number 1 in the chat if you know someone that uses Facebook like a journal, and they probably shouldn't. I was that person. Now I have my journals, and I'm not writing all my business on Facebook, and I have purposeful fun. So I practice personal fun. All right. I love animals. Any chance I get, I'm making sure that I'm happy, that I'm experiencing this joy like a child again. One of the greatest ways that you can connect to a youth, and we will go over this more in depth on our next session, is making sure that they're having fun. Find out what their interests are, make them smile. That's going to heal, because for every ounce of adversity they have faced, give them that ounce of positivity and watch their lives change. And we're going to be closing soon here in about, I'd say, 3 minutes. But anyway, when I'm doing all this work, going to therapy, watching my son excel, my daughter excel, and all these things, I felt unstoppable. Life is just like, yes. And then family. I got into a car accident in 2017. Adversity hit again. Put a number 1 in the chat if you know what I'm talking about when I say that life goes really, really amazing and positive, and everything is going your way, and then something, maybe it's a natural disaster, maybe it's just something happens and it just throws everything away that you've worked for, so it seems. That's what happened in this car accident. I was on my way to speak, and a woman T-boned me, and my car spun out of control, into the next lane and an 18-wheeler truck hit me. And I almost died. I had to be cut out of the car. I lost my ability to walk, work, and to speak clearly. I lost connections, my smile. And I had to identify my why and use that to get myself back up again. And my children were a huge part of my why. What's your why? You don't have to tell me. I mean, of course, I'd love to hear it, but you don't have to tell me now. But think about, what is your why? What made you get on this webinar today? What keeps you doing the work that you do every single day? And I know it's not just the paycheck, because the paycheck is not enough for what you all do. What's your why? You use that why as a reason to get back up again. When natural disaster strikes, when this COVID stuff has happened and everything else that could happen, you've got to be, continuing to do the work within yourself so that when these things do happen, you're ready. And also you have to remember what your why is so that you keep on going. When I got myself together again and relearned to walk and relearned to talk, I decided that I was never going to play small again. And I was never going to allow fear to get in the place of me accomplishing my dreams. And one of the dreams that I had was always to go to Africa. Number one, it's part of my culture. But number two, I wanted to go over there and serve. So I bought myself a ticket in 2018 and I went to go serve. And along the way, I met a little girl named Forgiveness. Not making this up. Her name was Forgiveness. And I will never forget how she just said, "Thank you for the work that you're doing with the kids. Thank you for helping us." And as you see here, I'm standing in dirt and I'm talking to youth. And I remember asking the organizers, well, where's their school? And the organizers were like, this is their school. It's just outside. And as you see in the back, I mean, it's just not a nice area. Now, Africa is, let me just make this disclaimer. Africa does not look like this in its entirety. It's actually very amazing. But the area in which I was in was a traditional village. Met these dynamic kiddos too, played games, delivered supplies, but also their school was run down. And I made the decision to actually build a school for youth that focuses on educating, empowering, and healing a child one at a time. And didn't have a lot of money to do it, certainly didn't have a lot of experience, but I had heart and I knew what my why was. And my why is my own children and the love that I give to them. I decided I wanted to continue to give that love to youth that are underserved. So I bought some land in Ghana in 2018, made the choice to build, and eventually MelRo's Girls School was built. So here we are with my babies. And at that time, at the time that it was open, because it got closed down because COVID, we had 498 girls that attended there and 164 that lived in the village. I'm sorry, foster youth can't do what? We can do anything we put our minds to. Here's my babies in class. And so that leads me to the end of the presentation. I am continuing on, going forward, and loving myself, healing myself, and very, very clear on my purpose. And in fact, I actually leave tonight, Carla knows this, to Ghana, Africa at 6:30 p.m. because I'm building my second place, a wellness clinic for women and children who have experienced trauma. So I'm very, very excited about that. My biggest accomplishment in this life is I still have the ability to love. And isn't that cool that it was an advocate when I was 17 years old, a CASA advocate who stepped in to vouch for me. And now I'm a diversity inclusion services director at Ohio CASA. So look how that turned back around, right? So if you're going to repeat a cycle, make sure it's a cycle that's one of empowerment. All right. This is a good time when you want to, create and repeat cycles. Now it's your turn, family. Here are your takeaways. Number one, the children that are most damaged by this world often end up being the ones to change it if they do the work to heal. Number two, the wounds that have been inflicted on us by others might be that person's fault, but ultimately healing is your responsibility. Number three, trauma might have run in our families, but we can make the decision to let it run out with us. Number four, we are able to show up in the world so much more powerfully when we are consistently doing the work to heal ourselves. Number five, at the intersection of adversity lies hope and strength. And in closing, if you stay in the game and consistently do the work, you will transform, your pain to power. All right, so let's connect. Here's my website. Here's my Instagram. Connect with me. Would love to hear from you. And I'm so honored and grateful to be here. That is my time. We have about 5.5 minutes left. So we're going to go ahead and open the floor for questions and comments and concerns. But I want you to all just take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale. One more time. In through your nose and exhale. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Carla. I really appreciate you. First Five Lake